and we move on to the last talk of this meet. And this talk would be by Professor Balachandar himself. I'm not going to take any further time trying to introduce him again, and because I'm what's between you and the audience. Just a note, I realized that probably 18 years back, Professor Prosperity, Professor Balachandar, they were part of this IJMF special issue on scientific issues in multiphase flow. And looking at the last 24 talks over the last 3 days, it's almost like a revision of what appeared in that special edition of IJMF. So thank you all of you for giving us this opportunity. Over to you, Professor Balachandar.
Thank you, Anubhav. Let me share my screen and tell me if you're able to see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, before I jump into the talk, I want to share a few thoughts. I will take about 3-4 minutes. About 2 years ago, Mahesh, who is the Dean of Alumni Affairs at IIT Madras, he broached the topic of having a workshop at IIT Madras to bring some of the best names in the area of multiphase flow. That was before the pandemic, and I loved that idea. And we started some initial planning, and we all know what happened over the last year and a half. Everything got crazy, but it's really wonderful that Anubhav joined, and he and Mahesh reconstituted this original idea and put together this workshop in a virtual format. Thank you very much. And what a distinguished lineup of speakers you guys were able to bring together. It has been a real delight for me listening to every talk. And certainly nobody can accuse me of checking my emails or spending time on WhatsApp or falling asleep because I did ask questions in almost every talk. Now, when Anubhav and Mahesh found out that I was turning 60, I'm greatly honored and humbled by the fact that they changed the meeting to a celebration. And it's a really wonderful thing for me to have so many of my esteemed colleagues to join this occasion and share some of their really the best and the latest work. I want to digress for a little while, and I want to say something. Professor Prosperity talked about my first and last name packing 4 major Hindu gods, Shiva, Rama, Krishna, and Balachandar means the elephant-headed god for those non-Hindus. So he talked about that, but there is also another secret about my birthday that many of you may not know. I was born on December 25th, so I have the privilege of being a Christmas Day baby. So it has been a secret because most people won't know this because officially my birthday is June 6th. When I was about 4.5, my parents basically couldn't put up with me at home. So they said I was 50 and they put me in school to satisfy official requirements. They changed my birthday to June 6th. So officially I'm 60 now, but in reality, in 2 more months, I will turn 60. Before I start my presentation, I just want to take a couple of more minutes to thank a few people. So this is a wonderful opportunity to say things that I have in my mind, but I've never verbally expressed. My academic foundation started at IIT Madras. IITs in general were, and they still are, they are just simply amazing places. You are surrounded and humbled by incredible talent. And following IIT, I went to Brown. My 5 years at Brown are absolutely golden days. Martin Maxey was my advisor, and you cannot have a better advisor than Martin. And he really set me in the right path in terms of academia. And by the way, he joined apparently yesterday. He told me that today he can't join, but I'm really honored by the fact that he was able to join us yesterday. And early also in my career, I had the fortune of being guided by some giants in our field. For example, Ron Adrian, Hassan Arif, Tom Hanratty, and Andrea Prosperity. These were really big names in multi-phase flow, and they serve as a role model for me. I want to take this opportunity to thank them all. And also, University of Illinois, I was there about 15 years, and then I've been at the University of Florida for another 15. These are perfect and supportive places. You can't ask for any better place. And also in both these places, I had the pleasure to work with some of the best students and best postdocs. Really, I want to express my thanks, wonderful thanks to my present and past students and postdoc. Last but not least, I want to thank all my academic friends, many of whom have joined this meeting. So thank you all for coming, attending, and giving your presentations. And also I enjoyed meeting some new faces whom I have not met before. For example, Luke, Ratul, and Sungyan, and Harish. These are people I got to know their work, and I really enjoyed very much. And thank you all for attending this talk. And with that long statement, let me spend about 10 minutes, a little more than 10 minutes, and I won't go through any details. I just want to talk about the fun we are having the last year or so in solving a very pressing problem that we all know. And also I need to tell you that a lot of people, a lot of very important people sort of participated in this joint work, and I want to thank all of them. So we have a global need. We have classrooms, we have restaurants and hospitals. And especially during the pandemic, there were questions such as, what's the safe distance between students? Should these chairs be placed 6 feet apart, or 10 feet, or 3 feet? And in a restaurant, how many people can safely be seated? And at university, the administrators did ask me, because they know that I do CFD, so they contacted me. Also, hospital contacted me, for example, with questions like, hey, we have a OR operation room, and we have intubing and outtubing of COVID patient, and of course they cough. How long should we empty the room before someone goes in, given the ventilation system? The real questions are being asked, but we don't have an ability to answer these things in any concrete way. So the question is, there is a clear global need. Even when we conquer COVID, imagine how many people get sick every year due to flu. And this is clearly an airborne transmitted disease. Now, we designed rooms and auditoriums and hospitals taking into account heating and ventilation. Why should not we take into account pathogen spreading, airborne pathogen spreading? And I'm very sure it's just a matter of time people will start factoring this in. And to be honest with you, in the last year and a half, I have never felt healthier. Because of COVID, I haven't gotten a sore throat. I have not gotten sick. So there is an opportunity that we can attack this problem of airborne diseases. We cannot eliminate it, but we can reduce the level of infection. So how do we attack this problem? Now, this problem is really challenging because there are too many parameters, because there's no one single answer. Rooms have different shapes, sizes, the ventilation varies, and the humidity temperature varies. And, every expiration event, whether it's breathing, talking, sneezing, it changes. And where are people going to be? That varies from place to place, from classroom to classroom, and so on. So every scenario is different, and there are millions to billions of scenarios, and that's what makes this problem really hard. Now, if somebody comes and tells us a particular room, particular ventilation, particular sick person, where the person is, and the other person where they are, then we can solve this problem. It's not that difficult. There's large eddy simulation with droplets. We can try to attack the airborne problem. But solving this problem and optimizing this all, just a brute force is not an option. So what other options do we have? So to solve this problem, we said, okay, we got to break this problem, bring it down to its knees. So let's divide all the various scales in the problem. So the viral scale, by which I mean is that when somebody coughs, how many droplets they put out, how much viral content is in their droplets. And then also at the other end, we can ask how many viruses one must inhale to get really sick. These are very virological questions, and I'm not going to tackle them. But we can leave this aside and we can solve the fluid mechanics problem, and which is what we want to solve. But the ultimate answer, we got to factor in this virus related issues as well. Now, from a fluid mechanical point of view, there are two major things. One, when you cough, you send out a puff of air with droplets. What happens to it? Okay, so immediately it just propels forward. So how big it is, where it is, and how many droplets stay up in the air and travel for minutes. So that's like an early time problem. But once you have that, then depending on the room and ventilation, how it spreads within the room. So those are the two problems that we divided. And first we attack the puff scale problem, then we are trying to attack the room scale problem. I will not be able to go into great details, but I will give you a big picture. And then once you solve this problem, you put it with the viral problem, and then you can do optimization, which is what the best number of seatings in a restaurant or something like that. So the puff scale problem, so someone coughs or sneezes, and there are droplets you can see. And what happens to these droplets, to the question that we asked. Now, the few important facts are large droplets fall out quickly, and smaller droplets stay up in the air, but they evaporate very rapidly, less than even within a second. And when they're fully evaporated, there is still a little bit of the salt-like thing, crystallite stuff that remains in the air, just an aerosol, and that carried out. And then it gets well mixed within the puff, and eventually it gets well mixed within the room. So in the puff scale problem, we want to ask the following question. If we know the mass, momentum, and buoyancy, which is the temperature of this cough, and we also know the number of ejected droplets, taking into account gravity and evaporation, we want to know, after maybe 1 or 2 seconds, what droplets remain airborne and will remain airborne for a long time, because that's what's going to spread in the room. So that's the basic question. And in terms of the puff, how far the puff travels. So this puff scale problem was the one we solved, and I'm not going to go into the details. This is a very simple problem. This has been done very well by Wells, and also after that by Lydia and John Bush. They had a good paper in 2014. And all we do is that this is a cough, and this puff travels forward, and the distance it travels, let's call it S, its size becomes bigger because of entrainment, and then it slows down because of drag, and buoyancy is conserved. So very simple mathematical formulation we can have, and the details are in this paper. And we solve this problem, and the two important parameters, which actually turns out not that important, the drag coefficient and the buoyancy constant. And then you can predict how the puff travels forward as a function of time. And this is the leading order solution. You can get higher order terms. So it's just a power law solution you get. So basically it goes as t to the power 1/4 roughly. And then we did many simulations. This is a chaotic problem. It's a turbulent problem. So we did many realizations. So ZC is nothing but the distance the center of mass of the puff goes. Different realizations. They all reasonably collapse and they fit very well with the theoretical prediction. So the first thing we established was we are able to predict the puff. But on the other hand, while we are able to predict the centroid position, the front, how far a little pieces can travel, widely varies from one cough to another. So there's no two coughs or sneezes are the same. And this is one reason why one must be careful is that 2 meters is just an average picture. Sometimes if somebody coughs, it can spread to even 3 meters or even 4 meters. And this has been very well shown by Lydia and others. And we are in agreement. Then we did many more simulations focusing on what happens to droplets. And this is the kind of peeled off portion that goes very fast. The nutshell is very, very simple. If you take the yellow line, which is the droplet initial spectrum, due to evaporation, you simply have a left shift. So the initial spectrum of droplet sizes shift to the left. That's the important physics of evaporation. And the physics of droplet dropping out is that there is a maximum size above which all the droplets would have fallen down. So in a nutshell, at the end of the puff phase, you still have small size, fully evaporated droplet nuclei that remain suspended, and their size distribution depends exactly based on what was ejected. And then since the theory is there, one of the things that we did, the details are in these 3 papers that we got published in the last year or so. We can use the theory to run hundreds of simulations or hundreds of conditions, and we can look at what happens. And we did that. And the nutshell, the important thing that we found out was the dry weather is not very good. As if you're in a place like Arizona, it's much more conducive for pathogen spreading, mainly because what happens is that in a dry weather, droplets evaporate very fast, and therefore they cannot, even before they fall down, they become very small and they remain airborne. Whereas in a humid place like Florida or Chennai, the droplets do not evaporate nearly as fast, and therefore they have a higher probability of falling down. And the ratio of final volume of pathogens that may remain airborne, the difference can be a factor 10, whether you're in a humid environment or in a dry environment. So that's the sort of a puff scale problem, and I want to spend another 5 minutes to finish the room scale problem that we have been working. And we took a very simple prototypical room. These central planes are not just dividers. This is just an empty square room of 10 meters by 10 meters by 3.2 meters high. And there is an air conditioner, 4-way cassette LG air conditioner at the top. And you have air coming out on the 4 vents. And you can see we've done the LES. This is the flow. Again, in the room scale problem, the question that we are asking is the following. Hey, if I know the room and where the ventilation is, and the ACH, which basically is saying how many air changes per hour. Typically, recommendations are upward of 6 or 7, but in a poorly ventilated place, it could be just 2. So ACH is a very important factor. So when you change this, that's an input. And then the initial spectra from the puff scale problem that I talked about, those are the input to the room scale. And really what we want to know is that if there is a sick person somewhere, if there is another person in the room, or bunch of students in the room, what's the probability of those people inhaling the ejected viral-laden droplet? So that's simply the question. So exactly what I said. So there is a person and they cough. This is the kind of the result that we had from the puff scale problem. Now we want to answer if there's a air conditioner there and it's on, what happens? Okay, so here is a person. So this is the puff scale problem, and let's say this person, the air conditioner is on. So you can see that in a couple of minutes, it spread over the entire room. It's simultaneously slowly falling down, but these are very small micron-sized droplet nuclei that stay airborne for minutes or even hours, depending upon the strength of the air conditioner. So this is the trajectory of the various stuff, and their trajectory is now controlled by the puff anymore, but it's controlled by the air conditioning ventilation flow in the room. This is a different scenario: a sick person sleeping in a bed. This is how the droplets spread. So this is an alias simulation with the initial condition coming from the puff scale problem. You can think of a different scenario. So this is another scenario of several people talking or speaking, and this is how their ejection spreads over a period of several minutes. So the challenge is you can have infinite number of scenarios of people talking, breathing, coughing and sneezing, and the receiver could be anywhere within the room, and this is the biggest challenge. So how do we tackle this really complicated problem? So one idea, very simple idea, but it turns out it's a powerful idea, is to say, why don't we just put droplets everywhere? We're not going to solve a specific source and a sink problem. We solve the problem for good, putting problems everywhere. Once you have this, you can have the statistics built based on the path lines and based on the streamline statistics. We can ask a question: if a source is at some location x0, and we want to know the receiver at a location x1, and it also now depends on the droplet size, whether it's a 10 micron or a 1 micron or a 200 nanometer particle. As a function of time, what's the probability of it going from x0 to x1? So there's a lot of statistics that we can do, and that's what we are doing. And then 4 different kinds of statistical properties we have been exploring. One, if we ensemble average all the sources, in other words, source can be anywhere and the sink can be anywhere. So what's the average concentration? Or we can ask a question, well, I have a very specific source. Somebody walked into the room, they were sick, and they sat in the middle of the room. And what's the probability of a sink, which is the receiver, anywhere in the room? Or you can change over and say, hey, the sink, the receiver is somewhere, and I don't know where the source is. Source could be anywhere. Or the more relevant one is specific source. A sick person is sitting somewhere, and there are a bunch of chairs 2 meters apart, 4 meters apart. What happened? So all these answers we have been exploring, and I really don't have the time to go over. But the question is that the baseline comes from this excellent paper. I recommend everybody reading it, by Bazant and Bush. They have a fantastic paper. They take into account viral problem, ejection problem, and the room scale. And the big assumption they make is the room is always well mixed. Okay, so they only talk about statistical thing. So what we have been able to do is we have been able to get what happens if I have a specific source and a specific sink. What the variation, how much these the probability of infection changes over and above the well-mixed baseline. Now, there are other questions that we can ask. We can collapse the data. The results for different ACHs collapse. this is my very last slide. So the main thing I want to tell you is that on average sense, the theory of Bazant and Bush is spectacularly good. But on the other hand, if you go to individual persons, and somebody is sick and somebody is coughing, somebody is 2 meters away, the probability of getting infection can be orders of magnitude different from what the well-mixed theory will predict. And that's where we are heading. And ultimately what we want to do is that if we have a statistical framework, now this is for one particular room, but how do we generalize to any rooms? Maybe we want to rely on ranch simulations, or maybe machine and deep learning models, so that we can build the statistics quickly and fast. Ultimately, build a user-friendly tool so people can punch in, hey, I have a room of 15 meters by 7 meters by 2.5 meters. How do I solve this problem? That's the kind of sort of science-based social distancing guidelines. Whether we can contribute something is the kind of question we are asking. And I will stop there. This is my last slide.
Thank you, Professor Balachandar. Questions?
Yes, I have one, if you permit. So, Bala, in your computations, do you take into account evaporation of droplets?
Jack, all the evaporation happens in the first few seconds.
I agree.
So the puff problem sets up the initial condition for the room scale problem. So at the end of the puff problem, which is after a few seconds, depending upon what the speech rate, what the coughing intensity, and what the rate of droplets ejected, the initial droplet basically left shifts in the log scale because of it goes from the full state to fully evaporated state. And then there is a maximum size above which everything would have dropped. So those are the airborne aerosols. They will remain airborne for a long time. Now, in the room scale problem, we do take care of droplet sedimentation, and the droplets do sediment, but it is very easy to establish and find the droplet size below which, even after an hour, they do not settle down. The turbulence is good enough to keep them well mixed. So that's how we tackle our evaporation and keep it mainly within the puff scale problem. In the room scale problem, evaporation is not important.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Unless the room is very humid, some special cases,
of course.
there could be things, but we haven't complicated the scenario.
Okay, thanks.
Any other question? There's a question in the chat box. It says, what is your opinion of the Lagrangian descriptor approach to studying dynamics in flow and extending this using deep learning?
So the way we are, I didn't want to go on forever. That's why I stopped. There's a lot of detail I skipped. So the approach that we are taking is, if we take this one room that we are studying in great detail, which is 10 meters by 10 meters by 3.2 meters, and for this ventilation, we first are finding that ACH doesn't matter. We can collapse the data for all ACH. Okay, that's the first lesson we are learning. And then the path line and streak line statistics seems also to be less sensitive on where you put the ventilator, okay? Whether in the center of the room, a little bit to one side. So that, in other words, we want step-by-step reduction of the problem. So what we're hoping is that we can now find the statistics. It's like a 2-point statistics, okay? Basically source at A, sink at B. What makes this problem very hard is neither homogeneous or isotropic. So it depends on the precise location of the source, the infected person, and the person to be infected. So we build the statistics, And if the statistics is invariant to different rooms and we can scale it, then we have a better chance of solving many different rooms, many different ventilation conditions, and any source, any sink problem, okay? Now, if we are not able to, and if we know that it changes from one room to another, a square room becomes a rectangular room, that is where we want to use machine learning to quickly get the statistics, not the individual turbulent flows themselves, because they are not important, because we are trying to predict statistical answers and a mean and a uncertainty associated with that prediction.
Harish,
Harish?
Yeah, you can go next.
Yeah, so I had this question on the puff structure itself, temporal structure. We have if you were to do a simulation, I mean, is your puff uniform for a certain period of time? Is it like a step function for a certain while? Because I think real puffs or real coughs or real sneezes tend to have, it increases and decreases, and I do not know how the droplet size distribution changes during this the cough event.
You're absolutely right. These puffs were created by a sharp increase in volume flow rate and a slightly slower decrease in flow rate. And this has been measured by experiments, and that the experimentally measured profile we give. Only parameter we changed was the volume of the ejection. We have considered several different cases. Now, the droplets, that's the virological problem that I talked about, that it is a big unknown, how many droplets get ejected and how many viral particles are there per volume of the ejected droplet. That is an uncertainty. So the final prediction, it becomes very important, but the fluid mechanical problem, either of the puff or for the room, are insensitive to those details. Okay, the final prediction as whether somebody will get sick or not depends on what gets ejected. Okay, but we can isolate that from the fluid mechanical problem and solve the fluid mechanical problem and add that after the fluid mechanical problem has been solved, and you can make the final prediction. Okay, now Basant and Bush's paper deals with all those details extremely very well. So if somebody is interested, they should read that. They talk about effectiveness of mass. They talk about a lot of different factors. So we don't have to worry about it, but Basant and Bush has already solved some of those issues.
There is a question in the chat box from Professor Sri Krishna. The question is, since turbulence enhances droplet evaporation, I wonder what mechanism keeps the small droplets in air for hours.
These are not droplets anymore. They are fully desiccated particles. So our ejection has mucus, viral particles, leftover food particles and whatnot you have. These guys, all the water, I shouldn't say all the water gets evaporated. Again, there is beautiful papers coming out of IISc and how these droplets will evaporate and finally will form crystal-shaped droplets. Now, imagine a situation, you have a 10 micron droplet, and let's say it has only 1% what I will call non-volatile, okay? That 1% non-volatile will bound with some amount of water will be left behind and will remain as a solid particle, aerosol. And that solid particle, even if it is of only 1% or 2% of the original volume, a 10 micron will reduce to 2 micron and will stay in the air for a long time. And that's why I answered Jack's question earlier that evaporation doesn't matter. It's just turbulence keeping the particle up in the air.
Are there any other questions? There's one more question in the Q&A box. How does the temperature affect the droplets of the sneeze?
temperature of, the ejection, the human body temperature will control the puff of air's temperature as well as the droplets temperature. And the ambient temperature and ambient humidity plays a role. There are a lot of people, Detlef Loche and other people have done, and they consider cases such as there are highly, very cold environments, humid environment, meat packing factories, and so on and so forth. People are trying to understand why some places are very conducive to infection while others are not. Of course, if you don't have very good ventilation, it's really bad. Now, I very briefly mentioned the difference between a dry environment, such as in Arizona, versus a humid environment. Humid environment slows down evaporation. When evaporation is flowed, the droplets remain big because they still have more water, and therefore their settling velocity is still large. Therefore, the droplets end up falling down on the floor. In a dry environment, the droplets, the evaporation wins over gravitational settling. So even before a droplet, some intermediate sized droplets, let's say 10 micron, before they fully fall down, they evaporate and they become dry and 2 micron aerosol, and turbulence will keep them up. Therefore, humidity and lower temperature, whatever will keep the droplets from evaporating, will be beneficial in a way, because it will allow more enhanced sedimentation of larger droplets. And remember, the larger droplets contain more viral particles than the smaller droplets.
Are there any other questions? If not, thank you, Professor Balachandar, once again for this wonderful talk on something completely very pertinent right now. And thank you to both Professor Soldate and Professor Balachandar for this session, and to all the speakers. So with this, we come to a close for this meeting. And if it was we are meeting in 3 dimensions, we would have probably gathered over good food and raise a toast to you. But until then, thank you, everyone.